Have you ever wondered what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object? When centuries of royal tradition clash head-on with military hierarchy? In the grand halls of Buckingham Palace, where every gesture carries weight and every word echoes through history, one moment of defiance would shake the very foundations of protocol and respect. Picture this: a decorated colonel, battle-tested and respected by thousands of soldiers, standing face-to-face with a young royal guard who dares to question his authority. What followed was not just a clash of personalities, but a revelation that would leave everyone present speechless and reshape how power, respect, and true leadership are understood in the most prestigious military circles. This is not just another story about military discipline or royal protocol. This is about the moment when someone's true character was revealed in the most unexpected way, leaving witnesses stunned and changing lives forever. What the colonel did next was so extraordinary, so completely unexpected, that it became the stuff of legend within palace walls. Are you ready to discover what happened when authority was challenged and the response defied every expectation? Buckle up, because this true story will take you on a journey through courage, wisdom, and the kind of leadership that legends are made of. Colonel James Morrison had seen more battlefields than most men see sunrises. At 58 years old, his weathered face carried the stories of 3 decades in Her Majesty's Armed Forces. Every line around his steel-gray eyes spoke of decisions made under fire, of men led through impossible situations, and of a lifetime dedicated to serving something greater than himself. His uniform, pressed to perfection, displayed rows of medals that represented not just personal achievements, but moments when he had chosen duty over comfort, others over himself. On this particular Tuesday morning in October, Colonel Morrison walked through the ornate corridors of Buckingham Palace with the measured stride of a man who had earned his place in these hallowed halls. He was here for a routine security briefing, something he had done dozens of times before. The palace guards knew him well, or so he thought. His reputation preceded him wherever he went in military circles. Soldiers spoke of him with a mixture of respect and admiration that few officers ever achieved. He was known as a leader who would never ask his men to do something he would not do himself, a commander who remembered the names of every soldier under his command, and a man who had personally written letters to the families of every fallen comrade. The palace on this morning buzzed with its usual controlled activity. Staff members moved with practiced efficiency through corridors that had witnessed centuries of British history. Portraits of monarchs passed, gazed down from gilded frames, their painted eyes seeming to follow visitors as they navigated the maze of rooms and hallways. The morning light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across marble floors that had been polished to mirror perfection. Everything about the palace spoke of tradition, hierarchy, and unquestioned respect for established order. As Colonel Morrison approached the security checkpoint near the East Wing, he noticed something different in the atmosphere. There was a tension in the air that he could not quite identify. Having spent years reading the subtle signs that could mean the difference between life and death on a battlefield, he had developed an almost supernatural ability to sense when something was not quite right. Today, that instinct was telling him to pay attention. The guard station was manned by Lance Corporal David Chun, a 24-year-old member of the Queen's Guard who had been assigned to palace duty for just 6 months. Chun was relatively new to this prestigious posting, having earned his position through exceptional performance during his basic training and subsequent assignments. He was known among his peers as someone who took regulations seriously, perhaps too seriously according to some of the older guards. While his dedication to duty was admirable, some wondered if his strict interpretation of protocol sometimes bordered on inflexibility. Chun had spent his morning reviewing security protocols and checking identification papers with the mechanical precision that had become second nature to him. He prided himself on treating every person who approached his station with the same level of scrutiny, regardless of their apparent rank or familiarity. To him, this was not about being difficult or showing off as authority. It was about maintaining the integrity of the security system that protected the royal family and the palace itself. He believed deeply that any compromise in protocol, no matter how small, could potentially create vulnerabilities that might be exploited. When Colonel Morrison approached the checkpoint, Chen looked up from his paperwork and instinctively straightened his posture. Even someone as junior as Chen could recognize the bearing of a senior officer. However, what happened next would surprise everyone involved, including Chen himself. Instead of the routine processing that both men expected, this interaction was about to become something much more significant. Morrison reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew his identification credentials, the same credentials he had presented countless times before at various military installations and government buildings. These documents bore his photograph, rank, and security clearance level, all properly stamped and validated by the appropriate authorities. He approached Chen's station with the confidence of someone who had never had his authority questioned, at least not in circumstances like these. But Lance Corporal Chen, perhaps feeling the weight of his responsibility more acutely than usual that morning, did something that would change the entire trajectory of both their lives. Instead of glancing at the credentials and waving the colonel through, as had become routine, Chen examined the documents with unusual intensity. He studied the photograph, comparing it carefully to Morrison's face. He checked the expiration dates, verified the security seals, and even held the documents up to the light to examine the watermarks. Morrison, accustomed to the quick recognition that his rank typically commanded, felt a flicker of surprise at this unusually thorough examination. However, he remained patient, understanding that the young guard was simply doing his job. He had always respected soldiers who took their duties seriously, even when it inconvenienced him personally. But what happened next caught him completely off guard. After several minutes of examination, Chen looked up at Morrison and spoke in a voice that was respectful but firm. "Sir, I need you to provide additional verification of your identity. These credentials appear to be in order, but Palace protocol requires secondary confirmation for all personnel, regardless of rank." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fired cannon. Morrison felt his eyebrows rise slightly, more in surprise than anger. In 30 years of military service, he had never been asked to provide secondary verification of his identity by a junior enlisted man. The request was not inappropriate given the stated protocol, but it was unprecedented in Morrison's experience. He found himself at a crossroads that would define not just this moment, but potentially his entire legacy as a leader. Around them, the normal palace activities continued, but Morrison became aware that their interaction was beginning to draw attention. Other staff members were glancing in their direction, some with curiosity, others with barely concealed concern. The tension that Morrison had sensed earlier was now crystallizing into something tangible and immediate. Morrison's first instinct was to assert his authority. He could have easily pointed to his rank, his decorations, or his well-established reputation within these walls. He could have demanded to speak to Chen's superior officer, or simply insisted that his credentials were sufficient. Many officers in his position would have done exactly that, and no one would have questioned their response. The military hierarchy is built on the understanding that rank has its privileges, and respect for authority is fundamental to the entire system. But Morrison paused, recognizing something in the young guard's demeanor that gave him cause to reconsider his initial reaction. There was no arrogance in Chen's request, no attempt at petty power plays or personal aggrandizement. The young man was clearly following what he believed to be proper protocol, even though doing so meant potentially offending a senior officer. Morrison realized that Chen was demonstrating exactly the kind of dedication to duty that he had always tried to instill in his own soldiers. This realization sparked something deeper in Morrison's mind. He began to see this moment not as a challenge to his authority, but as an opportunity to demonstrate the kind of leadership that he had always believed in. Throughout his career, he had preached to his soldiers about the importance of integrity, about doing the right thing even when it was difficult or uncomfortable. Now, Faced with a junior soldier who was clearly trying to do exactly that, Morrison had a chance to prove that his leadership philosophy was more than just words. The seconds stretched as Morrison considered his response. He was acutely aware that how he handled this situation would send a message not just to Chun, but to everyone within earshot. The palace staff who were watching, the other security personnel, and anyone else who might hear about this interaction later would all form opinions about his character based on what he did next. More importantly, Morrison realized that this was a defining moment for the young guard as well. How Morrison responded would either validate Chin's commitment to proper protocol or potentially undermine his confidence in following regulations when they conflicted with apparent convenience. Morrison's mind flashed back to his own early days in the military, when he had been a young soldier trying to navigate the complex world of military hierarchy and protocol. He remembered the officers who had treated his earnest attempts to do his job correctly with patience and respect, and he remembered those who had dismissed his concerns or made him feel foolish for following regulations. The memory of those experiences had shaped his own approach to leadership over the years, and now they were guiding him toward a response that would surprise everyone present. The afternoon sun continued to stream through the palace windows, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow across the marble floor. In this moment of suspended time, Colonel Morrison was about to make a decision that would become legend within the palace walls, a story that would be told and retold for years to come. But nobody present, not even Morrison himself, could have predicted what form that decision would take. The atmosphere in the corridor seemed to intensify as other palace staff members began to take notice of the unusual situation developing at the security checkpoint. Word began to spread quietly through the nearby offices and passages that something interesting was happening between the respected colonel and the young guard. Some staff members found excuses to walk past the checkpoint, while others positioned themselves where they could observe the interaction without appearing to be overly curious. Morrison took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders like an old, familiar coat. This was the kind of moment that separated true leaders from those who merely held rank. It was a test not of his authority, but of his character, and he was determined not to fail it. What happened next will be talked about in military circles for decades to come. Colonel Morrison, instead of asserting his rank or demanding special treatment, did something that no one expected. He smiled at Lance Corporal Chun, a genuine smile that reached his eyes and transformed his entire demeanor. Then, in a voice loud enough for everyone in the vicinity to hear, he said, "Absolutely, Lance Corporal. You are absolutely right to ask for additional verification. I commend you for following protocol exactly as you should." The words hit the assembled staff like a thunderclap. Several people who had been discreetly watching the interaction actually stopped in their tracks, unable to believe what they had just heard. Here was a senior officer, a man whose authority was unquestioned throughout the military hierarchy, not only accepting a junior soldier's request for additional verification, but actually praising him for it. The moment was so unexpected, so completely contrary to what everyone anticipated, that it seemed to suspend the normal flow of time within the palace walls. Morrison reached into his briefcase and withdrew his military identification card, his security clearance documentation, and a letter of introduction from his commanding officer. He placed each document carefully on Chen's desk, arranging them in a neat row so that the young guard could examine them easily. But he did not stop there. Morrison then proceeded to recite his service number from memory, provided his commanding officer's direct contact information, and even offered to remain at the checkpoint while Chun called to verify his identity through official military channels. Lance Corporal Chun, who had braced himself for a potential confrontation or at least some expression of irritation from the senior officer, found himself speechless. His hands trembled slightly as he picked up the additional documents, not from nervousness about Morrison's response, but from a growing realization of what was happening. This was not just about verifying identification anymore. This was about something much more profound, something that would change his understanding of leadership and respect forever. As Chun examined the documents, Morrison began to speak again, but this time his words were directed not just to the young guard, but to everyone within earshot. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying the authority of 3 decades of command but softened by genuine warmth. "I want everyone here to understand something important. Lance Corporal Chun is doing exactly what he should be doing. He is following security protocols without exception, without regard for rank or familiarity. This is precisely the kind of dedication and integrity that keeps the royal family safe, that keeps our nation secure, and that makes me proud to wear this uniform." The crowd that had gathered was growing larger by the minute. Word was spreading through the palace like wildfire that something extraordinary was happening at the East Wing security checkpoint. Staff members were finding reasons to walk past. Security personnel were emerging from their posts, and even some of the senior palace officials were making their way toward the scene. What they found was unlike anything they had ever witnessed in these formal, tradition-bound halls. Morrison continued his impromptu address, his voice gaining strength and conviction with each word. Too often in military and civilian life, we mistake convenience for efficiency, familiarity for security. We begin to cut corners because someone is well known, because they have done something many times before, because their rank suggests they should be above certain procedures. But security protocols exist for everyone, precisely because exceptions create vulnerabilities. Lance Corporal Chun understands this better than many officers twice his age and with 10 times his experience. Chun completed his examination of the documents and looked up at Morrison with an expression that mixed professional satisfaction with personal amazement. Everything was in perfect order, exactly as he had expected it would be. But the process had revealed something far more valuable than simple identity verification. It had revealed the character of both men involved in this interaction, and the results were beyond anything Chun had hoped for when he first decided to follow protocol to the letter. But Morrison was not finished. What he did next would become the most talked-about moment in palace security history for years to come. He straightened to his full height, brought his heels together with a sharp click, and rendered a perfect military salute to Lance Corporal Chun. The gesture was so unexpected, so completely unprecedented, that several people in the gathered crowd actually gasped audibly. "A colonel, saluting à lance corporale." Not the other way around, as military protocol would typically dictate, but a senior officer showing respect to a junior soldier in the most formal and public way possible. "Lance Corporal Chun," Morrison said, maintaining his salute until Chun instinctively returned it. "You have demonstrated today what true military bearing looks like. You have shown integrity, dedication, and courage. It takes courage to insist on following proper protocol when faced with pressure to make exceptions. It takes integrity to treat every person equally, regardless of their apparent status or familiarity. And it takes dedication to maintain the highest standards even when it would be easier to take shortcuts." The salute exchange seemed to last forever, though in reality, it was probably no more than 30 seconds. But those 30 seconds crystallized something important for everyone present. This was not about rank or hierarchy or who had the authority to do what to whom. This was about mutual respect between soldiers, about recognizing excellence regardless of where it comes from, and about leadership that lifts others up rather than simply asserting dominance. When Morrison finally dropped his salute, the silence in the corridor was so complete that people could hear their own heartbeats. Then, slowly, someone began to applaud. It started with one person, then another, then spread through the entire gathering until the sound of clapping echoed off the marble walls and high ceilings. The applause was not polite or perfunctory. It was genuine appreciation for witnessing something remarkable, something that reminded everyone present why they had chosen to serve their country and their monarch. But the most significant reaction came from Chun himself. As the applause continued around them, the young guard's eyes filled with tears that he tried desperately to blink away. This was not the response he had expected when he decided to insist on proper protocol verification. He had anticipated, at best, grudging compliance and, at worst, a formal complaint to his superiors. Instead, he had received recognition, respect, and validation of his commitment to duty from one of the most respected officers in the military. Morrison noticed Chin's emotional response and stepped closer to the security desk, lowering his voice so that only Chun could hear his next words. "Lance Corporal, I need you to understand something. What you did today was not routine procedure enforcement. What you did was demonstrate the kind of character that separates good soldiers from great ones. You had every reason to make an exception for me. You knew who I was, you had seen my credentials before, and you understood that insisting on additional verification might create an uncomfortable situation. But you chose to follow proper protocol anyway, because you knew it was the right thing to do." Chin nodded, not trusting his voice to remain steady if he tried to speak. Morrison continued, "I have commanded thousands of soldiers over 3 decades of service. I have seen men and women demonstrate courage under fire, sacrifice for their comrades, and uphold the highest military standards under the most difficult circumstances. But what you showed today ranks among the finest examples of military bearing that I have ever witnessed. You should be proud of yourself, and you should never doubt that you made the right choice." The gathered crowd was beginning to disperse, but slowly and reluctantly. People seemed hesitant to leave, as if they instinctively understood that they had witnessed something special and did not want the moment to end. Conversations were breaking out in small groups as staff members discussed what they had just seen, trying to process the significance of Morrison's response to Chin's protocol enforcement. Word of the incident was already beginning to spread beyond the immediate vicinity. In the age of instant communication, news of Morrison's unprecedented salute to a junior guard was making its way through military channels, palace staff networks, and eventually to the highest levels of command. But the story that was spreading was not about a conflict between authority and protocol. It was about leadership, respect, and the kind of character that defines truly great military officers. Morrison completed his identification verification process and was cleared to proceed to his security briefing. But before he left the checkpoint, he turned back to Chin one final time. "Lance Corporal," he said, his voice once again pitched loud enough for others to hear, "I will be requesting a meeting with your commanding officer to ensure that your dedication and professionalism today are properly recognized in your service record. What you have demonstrated deserves formal acknowledgement, not just my personal appreciation." Chin finally found his voice, though it was somewhat shaky with emotion. "Thank you, sir. I was just doing my job as I understood it should be done." Morrison smiled again, that same genuine smile that had started this entire extraordinary interaction. "Lance Corporal, doing your job as you understand it should be done, without compromise and without exception, is exactly what makes you an exceptional soldier. Never apologize for maintaining the highest standards. The military needs more soldiers like you, and the country is safer because of people like you." As Morrison walked away from the checkpoint, his footsteps echoing off the marble floors, he left behind more than just a cleared security station. He left behind a young soldier whose confidence in his own judgment had been validated by one of the most respected officers in the military. He left behind a gathering of palace staff who had witnessed an example of leadership that would influence their own behavior for years to come. And he left behind a story that would be told and retold, growing in significance with each telling, until it became part of palace folklore. The security briefing that Colonel Morrison attended that afternoon proceeded as scheduled, but the atmosphere was markedly different from what anyone expected. Word of the morning's incident at the East Wing checkpoint had spread through the palace with remarkable speed, and Morrison found himself the center of attention in ways he had not anticipated. Senior palace officials, military advisors, and security personnel all seemed eager to discuss what had happened, though their approaches varied considerably. General Patricia Whitmore, the senior military liaison to the palace, was the first to address the incident directly. She had known Morrison for over 15 years and had worked with him on numerous security assessments and protocol reviews. As the briefing began, she cleared her throat and looked directly at Morrison with an expression that mixed professional curiosity with personal admiration. "James," she said, using his first name in a way that indicated this was a personal rather than purely professional conversation. "I understand there was an interesting interaction at security this morning. Would you care to share your perspective on what happened?" Morrison had expected this question and had spent considerable time during his walk to the briefing room considering how to respond. He understood that his actions would be scrutinized, analyzed, and potentially criticized by some who might view his salute to a junior enlisted man as inappropriate or contrary to military hierarchy. But he also knew that his response to this question would shape how the incident was understood and remembered by everyone present. "General," Morrison replied, "I encountered a young soldier who demonstrated precisely the kind of integrity and dedication that we claim to value in our military personnel. When faced with a choice between convenience and proper protocol, he chose protocol. When faced with potential pressure from a senior officer, he chose to maintain his standards. I felt it was important to recognize that choice publicly and immediately in a way that left no doubt about my respect for his decision." The room fell silent as Morrison's words sank in. Several of the attendees exchanged glances, processing not just what Morrison had said, but how he had said it. There was no defensiveness in his voice, no suggestion that he felt he had been treated inappropriately, and no indication that he regretted his response. Instead, there was conviction, pride, and a clear sense that he believed he had done exactly the right thing. Admiral Catherine Reynolds, the most senior military officer present, leaned forward in her chair. "Colonel Morrison, help me understand something. You saluted a lance corporal. In 35 years of military service, I have never seen a senior officer salute a junior enlisted person outside of very specific ceremonial contexts. Can you explain your reasoning?" Morrison had anticipated this question as well, and his response revealed the depth of thought that had gone into his actions. "Admiral, the military salute is fundamentally a gesture of respect and recognition. We typically use it within the framework of hierarchy, with junior personnel saluting senior officers as a mark of respect for rank and authority. But at its core, the salute represents acknowledgement of military bearing, dedication, and service. Lance Corporal Chen demonstrated all three of those qualities in a way that deserved formal recognition." He paused, gathering his thoughts before continuing. "More importantly, I wanted everyone present to understand that true military leadership means recognizing excellence wherever we find it, regardless of rank. If we only show respect to those above us in the hierarchy, we miss opportunities to encourage and validate the kind of behavior that actually makes our military strong." Chen's commitment to proper protocol, his refusal to compromise standards for the sake of convenience, and his courage in potentially inconveniencing a senior officer all represent the highest military virtues. Those virtues deserved recognition. The discussion that followed revealed a fascinating range of perspectives within the room. Some of the attendees, particularly those with extensive field experience, expressed strong support for Morrison's actions. They shared stories of junior personnel who had demonstrated exceptional courage, integrity, or dedication, and noted how rarely such behavior received immediate public recognition. They argued that Morrison's response would encourage other young soldiers to maintain high standards even when faced with pressure to make exceptions. Others, primarily those with more traditional views of military hierarchy, expressed concern about the precedent Morrison's actions might set. They worried that public gestures of respect from senior officers to junior personnel might undermine the authority structure that kept military organizations functional and disciplined. They suggested that while Chen's behavior was commendable, there were more appropriate ways to recognize it that would not blur the lines of military hierarchy. The debate continued for nearly an hour, with Morrison listening carefully to all perspectives, but remaining firm in his conviction that he had acted appropriately. Finally, General Whitmore called for a break in the discussion and asked Morrison to step outside with her for a private conversation. In the hallway outside the briefing room, Whitmore's demeanor shifted from formal to personal. "James, I need to ask you something directly, and I need an honest answer. When you saluted the young guard, were you thinking about military protocol, or were you thinking about something else?" Morrison considered the question carefully before responding. "Patricia, I was thinking about my grandson. He is 23 years old, just about the same age as Lance Corporal Chun. He enlisted in the Army 8 months ago, and he is currently stationed in Germany. When I saw Chun standing his ground about protocol verification, I thought about what I would want to happen if my grandson ever found himself in a similar situation. Would I want his senior officers to respect his dedication to duty, or would I want them to dismiss his efforts as an inconvenience?" Whitmore nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her expression. "And what conclusion did you reach?" "I realized that if I want senior officers to treat my grandson with respect when he demonstrates integrity and dedication, then I have an obligation to treat other young soldiers the same way. I cannot expect others to recognize excellence in my family members while failing to recognize it in theirs. Leadership is not about demanding respect for ourselves. It is about showing respect for others, especially those who are trying to live up to the standards we have set for them." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sir Edmund Hartwell, the palace security coordinator, who had been searching for both Morrison and Whitmore. His expression was serious, but not alarmed, suggesting important news rather than an emergency. "General Whitmore, Colonel Morrison," he said with characteristic formality, "I need to inform you that Lance Corporal Chin's commanding officer has requested a meeting with you both." Apparently, the young man submitted a formal report about this morning's incident, and his superiors want to discuss the implications for palace security protocols. Morrison felt a moment of concern, wondering if Chun had somehow gotten into trouble for his strict enforcement of verification procedures. "Is the Lance Corporal facing disciplinary action?" he asked. Hartwell's expression shifted to something approaching a smile. "Quite the contrary, Colonel. For what I understand, his commanding officer wants to discuss implementing Chin's approach as standard protocol for all security checkpoints. Apparently, your endorsement of his methods has prompted a review of current procedures, with an eye toward ensuring that all personnel maintain the same level of thoroughness regardless of who they are processing." The implications of this development were significant. If Chin's approach became standard protocol, it would mean that every person entering the palace, regardless of rank or familiarity, would be subject to the same level of verification. This would represent a substantial change in how palace security operated, moving from a system based partially on recognition and familiarity to one based entirely on documented verification. Morrison found himself both surprised and pleased by this development. His spontaneous decision to support Chin's protocol enforcement was having ramifications far beyond what he had imagined when he chose to salute the young guard. What had begun as a simple gesture of respect was evolving into a potential transformation of palace security procedures. "When is this meeting scheduled?" Whitmore asked. "Tomorrow morning at 1000 hours, Hartwell replied. "The meeting will include Chin's commanding officer, the palace security chief, and several representatives from military intelligence who are interested in the security implications of standardizing verification procedures." As they returned to the briefing room, Morrison reflected on how quickly and unexpectedly the day's events were evolving. What had started as a routine security checkpoint interaction was becoming a case study in leadership, protocol, and organizational change. The young guard's commitment to proper procedures had intersected with Morrison's leadership philosophy in a way that was influencing policy discussions at the highest levels of palace security. The remainder of the afternoon's briefing took on a different character after the break. Instead of focusing solely on routine security matters, the discussion increasingly turned to questions of leadership, protocol enforcement, and the balance between efficiency and thoroughness in security procedures. Morrison found himself at the center of these discussions, not just as a participant, but as an example of how senior leaders should respond when junior personnel demonstrate exceptional dedication to their duties. As the briefing concluded, several attendees approached Morrison individually to share their thoughts about the morning's incident and its implications. The responses were overwhelmingly positive, with many expressing appreciation for his willingness to recognize excellence in a junior soldier and his demonstration of leadership principles that many had heard about, but rarely seen implemented so dramatically. Admiral Reynolds was among the last to approach Morrison as the room cleared. "Colonel," she said, "I have been thinking about our earlier discussion regarding your salute to Lance Corporal Chun. I want you to know that after hearing your explanation and witnessing the positive response from everyone involved, I believe you set an example that other senior officers should follow. We talk frequently about developing future leaders, but we rarely demonstrate the kind of respect and recognition that actually encourages leadership development in junior personnel." Morrison thanked the Admiral for her support, but his mind was already turning toward tomorrow's meeting and the potential implications of Chin's approach becoming standard protocol. He realized that his decision to support the young guard had initiated a chain of events that could influence palace security procedures for years to come. The thought both excited and sobered him as he considered the responsibility that came with such influence. The meeting the following morning began with an atmosphere of anticipation that Morrison had rarely encountered in military settings. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell, Chin's commanding officer, had arrived early and was visibly excited about the agenda they were about to discuss. She had brought with her a comprehensive report detailing Chin's service record, his performance ratings, and a detailed analysis of his approach to security protocol enforcement. When Lance Corporal Chun entered the conference room, Morrison was struck by the transformation in the young soldier's bearing. The previous day, Chun had been competent and dedicated, but there had been an underlying uncertainty about him, a sense that he was still finding his way in the complex world of palace security. Today, he walked with visible confidence, his posture straighter and his expression more assured. Morrison realized that the recognition he had received was having a profound impact on Chin's self-perception and professional confidence. "Lance Corporal Chun," Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell began, "please explain to the assembled officers your understanding of security protocol verification and why you believe it should be applied consistently regardless of the rank or familiarity of the person being processed." Chun stood and addressed the room with a clarity and conviction that impressed everyone present. "Ma'am, security protocols exist to protect against all possible threats, not just the obvious ones. History shows us that some of the most successful security breaches have occurred when individuals exploited familiarity, assumed recognition, or took advantage of reduced vigilance around people who were considered trustworthy. If we create exceptions to our verification procedures for anyone, we create vulnerabilities that could potentially be exploited." He paused, gathering his thoughts before continuing. "Furthermore, consistent application of security protocols ensures that all personnel, regardless of rank, understand that security is everyone's responsibility. When senior officers submit to the same verification procedures as junior personnel, it demonstrates that security measures are not arbitrary exercises of authority, but necessary protections that apply to everyone equally." Morrison found himself nodding in agreement as Chun spoke, impressed not just by the content of his remarks, but by the confidence and clarity with which he presented them. The young soldier had clearly spent considerable time thinking about the broader implications of his approach to security, and his analysis was both sophisticated and convincing. The palace security chief, Commander Robert Sterling, raised a practical concern. "Lance Corporal Chun, your approach is admirable from a security standpoint, but we need to consider efficiency and practicality. If we subject every person to extensive verification procedures, regardless of their familiarity or clearance level, we could create significant delays and disruptions to palace operations. How would you address this concern?" Chin's response revealed that he had anticipated this question and had developed a thoughtful solution. "Sir, I believe the key is to design verification procedures that are thorough but efficient. Modern technology allows us to verify identity and authorization quickly when proper documentation is presented. The additional time required for comprehensive verification is typically measured in minutes, not hours. More importantly, the time invested in proper verification could prevent security incidents that would cause much more significant disruptions to palace operations. General Whitmore leaned forward with obvious interest. Lance Corporal, you mentioned modern technology. Do you have specific suggestions for how technology could streamline verification procedures while maintaining thoroughness? Chen's face lit up with enthusiasm as he outlined a vision for enhanced security protocols that impressed everyone in the room. Ma'am, we could implement a system that combines biometric verification with digital credential authentication. Each authorized individual would have biometric data on file that could be matched instantly with fingerprint or retinal scanning. Their digital credentials would contain embedded security features that could be verified automatically through secure database queries. This would allow us to maintain the highest security standards while actually reducing the time required for verification. The discussion that followed revealed that Chun had been researching security technologies and procedures far beyond what his current position required. He had studied case histories of security breaches, analyzed successful prevention strategies, and developed a comprehensive understanding of how modern security systems could be optimized for both effectiveness and efficiency. His insights were not just those of a dedicated guard following orders, but of someone who had taken initiative to deeply understand his field and develop innovative solutions to complex challenges. Morrison realized that what he had initially seen as simple dedication to following orders was actually evidence of a much more sophisticated understanding of security principles and leadership potential. Chen was not just a good soldier. He was a natural analyst and problem solver who had the potential to make significant contributions to military and security organizations throughout his career. Commander Sterling was clearly impressed by Chen's presentation. Lance Corporal, your analysis suggests that implementing comprehensive verification procedures could actually improve efficiency while enhancing security. Have you considered the training implications of implementing such a system? How would you ensure that all security personnel could operate these enhanced procedures effectively? Chen's response demonstrated that he had thought through implementation challenges as thoroughly as he had analyzed the technical aspects. Sir, I believe the key to successful implementation is comprehensive training that emphasizes both the technical skills required to operate new systems and the underlying security principles that make those systems necessary. Personnel need to understand not just how to follow procedures, but why those procedures are important and how they fit into the broader security framework. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell interjected with information that surprised everyone present. I should mention that Lance Corporal Chun has been developing training materials for enhanced security procedures on his own initiative. He has created detailed documentation, practical exercises, and assessment tools that could be used to train other personnel in comprehensive verification techniques. Morrison felt a surge of pride and vindication. His instinctive decision to recognize and support Chen's dedication was proving to have identified not just a good soldier, but a potential future leader who was already contributing to organizational improvement and innovation. The young man's initiative in developing training materials demonstrated exactly the kind of forward-thinking approach that military organizations needed to stay ahead of evolving security challenges. The meeting continued for another hour, with Chun fielding questions about implementation timelines, resource requirements, and potential challenges. His responses consistently demonstrated depth of knowledge, practical wisdom, and innovative thinking that impressed everyone present. By the time the meeting concluded, there was unanimous agreement that Chen's approach should be implemented as standard protocol throughout palace security operations. But the most significant development came at the very end of the meeting, when Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell made an announcement that surprised everyone, including Chun himself. Based on Lance Corporal Chin's exceptional performance, his innovative contributions to security protocol development, and his demonstration of leadership potential, I am recommending him for accelerated promotion consideration and assignment to the Palace Security Development Team. His insights and initiative have proven invaluable, and we believe he has the potential to make significant contributions at a higher level of responsibility. Chin's expression showed shock, gratitude, and determination in equal measure. This was far beyond anything he had hoped for when he decided to strictly enforce verification procedures the previous morning. What had started as a simple commitment to following orders had evolved into recognition of his leadership potential and an opportunity for rapid career advancement. Morrison stood and addressed the room one final time. Ladies and gentlemen, what we have witnessed over the past 2 days is a perfect example of why leadership means recognizing and supporting excellence wherever we find it. Lance Corporal Chen demonstrated integrity, dedication, and innovative thinking. When those qualities were recognized and supported rather than dismissed or discouraged, they flourished into contributions that will benefit Palace security for years to come. He turned to face Chen directly. Lance Corporal, you should understand that your commitment to proper protocol was just the beginning. What has impressed everyone in this room is your initiative in thinking beyond simple rule following to understanding the principles behind the rules and developing ways to implement those principles more effectively. That kind of thinking is what separates followers from leaders and what identifies individuals with the potential to make lasting contributions to their organizations. As the meeting adjourned, Morrison reflected on the remarkable chain of events that had begun with a simple request for additional identity verification. Chen's insistence on following proper protocol had revealed his character and potential. Morrison's decision to support and recognize that commitment had validated Chen's approach and given him confidence to share his broader ideas about security improvement. The resulting discussion had led to significant changes in Palace security procedures and recognition of Chen's leadership potential. The story that had begun with a question of authority had become something much more significant. It had become a demonstration of how true leadership works to identify, support, and develop talent regardless of where it appears in an organization. It had shown how a moment of courage in following proper procedures could lead to innovation, advancement, and organizational improvement when supported by leaders who value integrity over convenience. As Morrison walked through the Palace corridors that afternoon, he noticed that the atmosphere had changed in subtle but meaningful ways. Staff members nodded to him with expressions that conveyed not just respect for his rank, but appreciation for his character. Word had spread throughout the palace about both the original incident at the security checkpoint and the follow-up meeting that had led to Chen's promotion and the adoption of his security innovations. But perhaps the most significant change was in Chen himself. When Morrison encountered the young soldier at his security station later that day, he saw a person who had been transformed by recognition, opportunity, and the validation of his commitment to excellence. Chen's greeting was professional and respectful, but it carried an undertone of confidence and determination that spoke of someone who now understood his own potential and was eager to fulfill it. The incident that had begun with a simple challenge to authority had become a story of leadership, recognition, and the power of supporting excellence wherever it appears. It had shown that true authority comes not from demanding respect, but from earning it through character, wisdom, and the courage to do what is right even when it might be easier to do otherwise. And it had demonstrated that the most meaningful moments in leadership often come not from grand gestures or formal ceremonies, but from everyday interactions where we choose to see potential, support integrity, and recognize the value in others. 6 months after the incident at the East Wing security checkpoint, the transformation of Palace security protocols was complete, and the ripple effects of that single moment of courage and leadership were still spreading throughout military and security organizations across the country. Lance Corporal Chun, now Sergeant Chun, had become something of a legend within palace walls, not just for his original commitment to proper protocol, but for the innovative security systems he had developed and implemented. The comprehensive verification procedures that Chun had designed were now being studied by security professionals at government facilities, military installations, and private organizations throughout the United Kingdom. His approach had proven so effective that requests for training and consultation were coming from international security agencies interested in adapting his methods to their own operations. What had begun as one young soldier's insistence on following proper procedures had evolved into a new standard for security excellence. Colonel Morrison found himself playing an unexpected role in this ongoing story. As word spread about his response to Chin's protocol enforcement, he was invited to speak at military leadership conferences, security symposiums, and command training programs. The incident had become a case study in responsive leadership, demonstrating how senior officers could identify and support exceptional performance in junior personnel. His decision to salute Chun was now taught in leadership development courses as an example of how true authority is expressed through recognition of excellence rather than assertion of hierarchy. The speaking engagements gave Morrison opportunities to reflect on the broader implications of that morning's events. He realized that his spontaneous decision to support Chun had revealed something important about his own leadership philosophy and its practical applications. The incident had forced him to articulate beliefs about military leadership, respect, and authority that he had held intuitively, but had never fully examined or expressed. During one particularly memorable presentation at the Royal Military Academy, Morrison was asked by a young cadet to explain the thought process that led to his decision to salute Sergeant Chun. The question prompted Morrison to share insights that went well beyond the immediate circumstances of the original incident. The military teaches us about chain of command, hierarchy, and the importance of respecting authority, Morrison told the assembled cadets. But true leadership requires understanding that authority and respect are not the same thing. Authority comes from rank and position. Respect must be earned through character and actions. When I encountered Sergeant Chun that morning, I realized that he was demonstrating the kind of character that deserved respect, regardless of his rank relative to mine. He continued, "More importantly, I realized that how I responded to his demonstration of integrity would send a message not just to him, but to everyone who witnessed our interaction. I could either support excellence when I found it, or I could prioritize convenience and familiarity over proper procedures. The choice I made in that moment would reveal my own character and would influence how others approached similar situations in the future." The cadet who had asked the original question raised her hand for a follow-up. "Sir, were you concerned that saluting a junior enlisted person might undermine military hierarchy or confuse the chain of command?" Morrison's response revealed the depth of thought he had given to this question over the months since the incident. That concern reflects a misunderstanding of what military hierarchy is supposed to accomplish. The chain of command exists to ensure effective communication, coordination, and decision-making, especially under pressure or in combat situations. It does not exist to prevent senior officers from recognizing excellence in junior personnel. In fact, one of the most important responsibilities of senior officers is to identify and develop leadership potential wherever they find it. He paused, looking around the room at the young faces that represented the future of military leadership. If anything, my response to Sergeant Chun strengthened military hierarchy by demonstrating that the system rewards integrity, dedication, and excellence. When junior personnel see that their commitment to proper procedures and high standards will be recognized and supported rather than dismissed or criticized, they're more likely to maintain those standards even under pressure. That makes the entire organization stronger and more effective. The presentation continued with questions about practical leadership challenges, the balance between efficiency and thoroughness in military operations, and strategies for developing leadership skills in junior personnel. Morrison found these discussions energizing and enlightening, as they forced him to think carefully about leadership principles he had developed through experience but had rarely needed to articulate so clearly. Meanwhile, Sergeant Chun was making his own contributions to leadership development and organizational improvement. His assignment to the Palace Security Development Team had provided him with opportunities to study security systems, analyze threat assessments, and develop training programs that were being implemented throughout government security operations. His work was attracting attention from senior officials who recognized his potential for even greater responsibilities and contributions. The relationship between Morrison and Chun had evolved into something approaching mentorship, though neither man used that term explicitly. They met periodically to discuss Chen's career development, security innovations, and broader questions about military leadership and service. These conversations revealed that both men had been profoundly influenced by their original encounter and its aftermath. During one such conversation, Chen expressed his gratitude for Morrison's support, but also shared his perspective on what had happened that morning at the security checkpoint. "Colonel, I need you to understand that when I insisted on additional verification that day, I was not trying to make a point about protocol or demonstrate my authority. I was simply doing what I believed was right, even though I knew it might be uncomfortable or inconvenient. Your response showed me that doing the right thing, even when it is difficult, can lead to opportunities and recognition that I never imagined possible." Morrison nodded, understanding the deeper significance of Chen's observation. "Sergeant, what you demonstrated that morning was moral courage. Physical courage gets more attention because it is more dramatic and visible. But moral courage, the willingness to do what is right even when it costs you something, is often more important and more difficult. Most people never have the opportunity to demonstrate physical courage, but we all face situations that require moral courage regularly." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of General Whitmore, who had requested a meeting with both men to discuss an opportunity that neither had anticipated. Her expression was serious but positive, suggesting important news rather than problems or concerns. "Gentlemen," she began, "I have been asked to discuss with you a proposal that has come from the highest levels of military command. The incident 6 months ago and the subsequent developments in security protocols and leadership recognition have attracted attention from senior officials who believe this story represents something important about modern military leadership and organizational excellence." Morrison and Chen exchanged glances, uncertain where this conversation was heading, but sensing that it involved something significant. General Whitmore continued, "You have been invited to participate in the development of a new leadership training program that would use your experience as a foundation for teaching responsive leadership, moral courage, and the importance of recognizing excellence regardless of rank. This program would be implemented throughout military training institutions and would reach thousands of future officers over the coming years." The proposal was both exciting and daunting. Morrison realized that his spontaneous decision to support Chen's protocol enforcement had the potential to influence military leadership development for an entire generation of officers. Chen understood that his commitment to proper procedures had evolved into an opportunity to contribute to fundamental changes in how the military approached leadership recognition and development. "General," Morrison said, "I would be honored to participate in such a program, but I want to ensure that the focus remains on the principles involved rather than the specific individuals. What happened between Sergeant Chun and myself was significant because of what it revealed about leadership, integrity, and mutual respect. Those lessons are much more important than the personal details of our particular interaction." Chen nodded in agreement. "Ma'am, I believe the real value of our experience lies in demonstrating that doing the right thing, even when it might be easier to compromise, can lead to positive outcomes for everyone involved. If our story can encourage other soldiers to maintain high standards and other leaders to recognize and support such commitment, then sharing it would be worthwhile." General Whitmore smiled, clearly pleased with their responses. Your attitudes confirm why you were selected for this opportunity. The program will focus on the leadership principles and character qualities that your interaction demonstrated, using your experience as a starting point for broader discussions about effective military leadership in modern contexts. As the meeting concluded with agreement to participate in the leadership program development, both Morrison and Chen reflected on the remarkable journey that had begun with a simple request for identity verification. What had started as a routine interaction at a security checkpoint had evolved into a story of leadership, courage, and mutual respect that was now being used to influence military training and development programs. The final chapter of their story was still being written, as the principles they had demonstrated continued to influence other soldiers, officers, and organizations. Morrison's decision to recognize excellence when he found it, and Chen's commitment to maintaining high standards regardless of convenience, had become part of military folklore and leadership training curricula. But perhaps the most important legacy of their encounter was the reminder it provided about the power of individual moments to create lasting change. Neither man had set out that morning to make history or influence military leadership development. They had simply chosen to act with integrity and character when faced with situations that tested their values. Those choices had created opportunities, sparked innovations, and influenced countless others who heard their story. Their experience demonstrated that true leadership is not about grand gestures or formal ceremonies, but about everyday decisions to do what is right, to recognize excellence in others, and to maintain the highest standards regardless of circumstances. It showed that authority earned through character and demonstrated through service is far more powerful and lasting than authority based solely on rank or position. And it proved that courage, whether moral or physical, when supported and recognized by others, can inspire changes that extend far beyond the original moment of courage itself. The story of Colonel Morrison and Sergeant Chen had become more than just an anecdote about military protocol and leadership response. It had become a testament to the transformative power of character, courage, and the willingness to do what is right even when the outcome is uncertain. Their legacy would continue to influence military leadership development for generations, reminding future officers that the most meaningful moments in leadership often come not from commanding others, but from recognizing and supporting excellence wherever it appears.